Welcome back to Elm Street, piggies. This is Paige Joy for Elm Street Radio, and today I'm coming at you with an interesting topic, one that was presented by ComingSoon.net. 5 reasons why A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 isn't as good as you think. In the article, which was written by Nick Perkins, he mentions that this conversation is going to be controversial. So much so that the legal team for ComingSoon.net made him write that his opinions are his own and do not reflect ComingSoon.net, Mandatory.com, or Crave Online. If you've been listening to Elm Street Radio for a while, you might know that Dream Warriors is not only my favorite Nightmare film, but it's my favorite film of all time. It's arguably the fan favorite as well. It usually wins online polls, it's discussed in countless forums, and even Wes Craven himself has acknowledged that it's the fan favorite. So with that being said, when an article like this is written, it's bound to ruffle a few feathers. But even you Fredheads might be surprised by my reaction. So let's pop some Hypnosil, spend the night in the quiet room, and let's have some straight talk only in here as we dive into 5 reasons why A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 isn't as good as you think. Number 5. Wes Craven's involvement was limited. The author notes that fans are quick to point out that Dream Warriors marked the return of Wes Craven, but he actually has little to do with the film. Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont stepped in to rewrite the script. And while he's technically correct, I feel like he leaves out some key details. Dream Warriors, the film we got, is still heavily inspired by Wes's original script. This happens often in Hollywood. Sometimes it takes multiple writers to flesh out a really good story, especially something as great as Dream Warriors. I don't know any fan that gives Wes the sole credit for Part 3. And in my opinion, it was like Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont took the best ideas from the original script and retooled them. Sure, there are things I wish they would have kept in that they took out, like Nancy being more of a leader of the Dream Warriors, or what happens after her infamous death, more on that later. But really, the film we got was perfect for the time. In fact, it was kind of ahead of its time on the topics that it discussed. The film does sequels right. It brings in a new batch of characters, all who are relatable, while incorporating existing franchise characters without dumbing them down or killing them off in the first 10 minutes. I'm looking at you, Dream Master. Number 4. Neil, the doofus. In his article, Nick writes, "Oh Neil, we hate you." And that's something I have heard often, the dislike for Neil Gordon. Nick in his article gives the writer some credit for creating a strong male figure to balance out the teenage cast, but then says the casting of Craig Wasson was a terrible idea. Neil, I don't think it's the credit he deserves. Some can choose to focus on his soft nature or the fact that he's got at least 15 years on Nancy and clearly is drawn to her. Something many people talk about, including Nick, is that Neil is sort of a love interest for Nancy. I think they had a bond, one to save the children. Nancy, she doesn't have time for a relationship. She's very focused and driven, and her only mission in life is to stop Freddy and save these Elm Street kids. She even gives her life for them. In the original script, there was a love scene written for Nancy and Neil, and I am so glad they made the decision to change that. I like the fact that this guy is kind of enamored with Nancy, and instead of feeding into him, she's just trying to save Springwood, if not the world. Number 3, it created a monster. The author quotes Eminem here in the article, referencing his song The Real Slim Shady. I created a monster. He talks about the cheese factor in the films, stating that it started with Dream Warriors. He states that Freddy was no longer scary. Instead, he was funny, quick-witted, and an outright stand-up comic. While there was some comedy in the film, there are still some really dark moments. This film is so heavy, with topics of teen suicide, depression, drug addiction, self-doubt, divorce, murder. It dealt with issues that most horror films have not, and for that reason, you have to have a little lighthearted fun. I think that's what makes Dream Warriors stand out so much. It wasn't just all scary, all sadness, all death. The film was right on the cusp of the MTV Freddy and the explosion in popularity. It for sure created a monster, but one that we all know and love so well. Number 2, Heather Langenkamp's performance. Nick makes sure to give Heather/Nancy a glowing review from the original Nightmare, and rightfully so. Oftentimes we talk about how Nancy Thompson doesn't get the appreciation she deserves. She really was one of the original Final Girls, one who was the most proactive, fight back, use not just your physical strength, but your mental strength too type of Final Girls. To which he makes sure to note. He states in Dream Warriors that her role was, and I quote, dull, ill-conceived, and ultimately pointless. He states that Nancy wasn't what she could have been in this film, and that her return was anticlimactic, and her death was even more so. I agree, Nancy's role could have been beefed up more, but her return was far from anticlimactic. Her return was such a powerful scene. It became a passing of the torch sort of scene. You'd expect from other slashers that if a returning character comes back into the fold, they would die off relatively soon. Almost as if oh hey, we forgot to kill off these characters in the last film. Let's just do it in the first act mentality. Again, I'm looking at you, Dream Master. But Nancy stays the entire film. She gives the other Dream Warriors strength, courage. She shows them that she believes in them and they matter. It was something she wasn't shown in the first film. So it's only natural that her role becomes full circle, even to her horrible death. Which leads us to the number one spot. Number one, Nancy's death should/could have been so much more. This is the one point that Nick makes that I can 100% agree with. The death of Nancy Thompson was so watered down in Dream Warriors. Nancy's death is always hard to watch, not just because it's done so poorly, but because it's a beloved character who ultimately meets her fate. I do believe Nancy had to die in order to fulfill her real destiny. It's something that Wes even explored in the original script. If you haven't read the original script and want a great discussion on the topic, head on over to one of our older episodes. We dedicated an entire show in June of 2017 to this topic alone. I'll link it for easy access. In the original script, Nancy is not fooled. It is Freddy who is the one who is fooled. Nancy turns the tables, and in an epic battle with Freddy, she goes down in a blaze of glory with him. Kristen cries as she tells her, "I'm going to dream you into the beautiful dream forever and ever," to which she does. We're not quite sure why this was taken out of the film, though it's hinted at in the end. The light turns on in the dollhouse. Even though it's not Nancy's bedroom, one can hope that it really is Nancy Thompson inside there. It's our personal belief that Nancy is in the dream world, fighting on as the gatekeeper. She balances Freddy out. She's the light to his dark. This again was explored in both the Innovation comics, which are considered canon, and then again in the little fan film co-written by your very own hosts called Don't Fall Asleep. We knew that Dream Warriors and even the series was not perfect. Many people were not aware of what happened to Nancy to get her to Dream Warriors, and even what happened to her after. It was important for us to tell that story and connect the dots. We used a lot of the Innovation comics as our inspiration and filled in the gaps where we could. If you haven't seen it yet, it's available on YouTube for free. Nick hits the head on some of the topics, and on others, I feel he just missed the mark. But this is a great topic for discussion. What are your thoughts? Is Dream Warriors really not as good as we all think it was? Or is it still the best film of all time to you? This is Paige Joy for Elm Street Radio, and until next time, whatever you do, don't fall asleep.